something I want to tell the world. I want to tell them about Chris Shorey. He has a bachelor's degree in geology from the University of Texas, a PhD from the University of Iowa. He's been at mines for 9 years. He's had several roles here, and one of the most visible of which is that he teaches a lot of our one-on-one sections, and he coordinates the labs and deals with the TAs and all that. As you'll see, he's a great teacher. He has stunning ratings in that class, and that's a hard audience if someone gave a TA for that group. He's also, he started iTunes U here at Mines. He has all his lectures on there, all the podcasts, and it's been really well received. I'm going to embarrass him a little bit. I'm going to read you a few quotes. These are from different things that we've nominated him for and stuff that's come across my desk. To say that he's effective in his role as an instructor is an understatement. Since taking over SYGM 101 in 2005, Chris has fundamentally changed the content, replaced the traditional stodgy laboratory exercises that have been used for decades with new and highly creative activities built on modern concepts and relevant technologies, and delivered the content in highly innovative and effective ways. Here's another one about the podcast. This is from someone somewhere else in the country. I can't say enough good things about this podcast series. I can't do it justice. In a word, it's incredible. It is a series of 66 one-hour lectures covering just about every scientific discipline you can imagine. I'll admit I haven't managed to listen through the entire series yet. I end up listening to the same lectures over and over again. He just bombards you with information in his skillfully crafted lectures. 66-hour lectures. Now that is a binge weekend. And the last one, another comment from a high school teacher. By far the best lecture series I've ever heard on any topic from any person. So with that, I give you Chris Shorey.
Well, thank you very much. This lecture is on trying to communicate science to the public. It's kind of one thing for us as scientists to communicate to another scientist, especially within our own field. It's quite another matter to communicate science to people who are outside of our field. As another piece of background on me real quick, I'm a member of what's known as the Climate Rapid Response Team. Climate science is my business, and you might imagine that communicating climate science to the public has been rather challenging. So this has been something that I've been trying to focus on for quite a while. How do you communicate complex science to a general audience? And so with that, I'll start with these two quotes, and I'm going to tell you a quick little story about myself. Actually, I've been trying to convince geologists for a long time that we all need to start our stories the same way, so I'll apologize right now, but no shit, there I was. About 9 years old in 1975, when that was the year that Star Wars came out. We're going to talk about that someday. I actually saw that movie in the theater 17 times. I think my mom was trying to get rid of me. And you're going to find out one reason why. My friend Danny and I that summer, we were getting really good at catching cicadas, those little bugs that, they're buzzing out in the middle of the heat of the Texas summer in flat, boring Dallas. Nothing else to do but catch cicadas and put them in a coffee can. And for some reason, even though I was into paleontology, I was into dinosaurs, I was into science at that age, I still had this kind of magical thinking in my head that, if I do certain things in a certain way in my world, that it would just turn out the way that I wanted it to. So we took our coffee can full of cicadas and we buried it under some pine trees, and we're going to dig it up during a full moon. 9-year-old boys can't wait that long. We wait about 2 days, dug it up, and you have rotten cicadas, right? So there's only one thing to do at this point, which is pour lighter fluid all over them, right? It was obvious to us. So we got the lighter fluid and we fill it up, and throw one match in, you get that little sulfurous smell, a little bit of smell of that wafting lighter fluid coming up, and you see a blue flame flickering, kind of going down the can, and it just goes out. And so my friend Danny, he's like, lights another match, throws it in. That's when the fireball went past our head. And you feel this heat, and you feel this rush of wind going past, and you hear this rush, and all of a sudden you're looking up at your friend, and he has no eyebrows, no eyelashes, no bangs, nothing. And he's looking at you, and you realize you're in the same boat. This flash memory of just looking in the mirror, both of us looking at each other going, we're pretty good at making up stories to get out of trouble. There's no story we can make up that's going to get us out of this one. So I distinctly remember the next day my mom taking me to the barber and saying, "Can you fix my idiot son?" So here I think I learned something out of that. I learned that maybe a little rationality is good, that learning a little bit about volatile fluids is good. Learning about my world in a more rational manner was good, and maybe the magical thinking wasn't doing me so well. So now I can stand in front of you and give a rational lecture without being embarrassed and my mom calling me an idiot, right? So that's just a little story. It's not so much science, but it's an example of what I'm going to teach you to do here today, which is basically construct stories in a way that most people can relate to. So we start off with some neurology here. There's an idea called grounded cognition that's becoming rather popular in psychology right now. The old ideas of psychology are that basically your brain is this modal computer, and like computers, you use what we call amodal symbols, like ones and zeros they're not physical reality, they're amodal symbols on this physical modal brain. Well, that's going away. And we're getting into something that we call grounded cognition, in which we say these modal aspects, things like your perception, your vision, your hearing, your feeling, your sensory aspects, your internal introspection, those things are the ground for all knowledge. Now, cognition up there, the term itself out of the dictionary would be the mental process of knowing, including aspects such as awareness, perception, those are modal. Reasoning and judgment, now those were what we call amodal. There's no physical thing out there that is reasoning, that is judgment. However, grounded cognition says even those amodal aspects of knowledge could possibly be grounded in actual experiences, right? Another definition of cognition, that which comes to be known or through perception, reasoning, or intuition, what we know as knowledge. Okay, so this is what we're trying to get across to the general public is our knowledge, our scientific knowledge. So if knowledge is grounded in experience, which is what this is saying, then maybe the stories are getting into the experience. So a quick definition of grounded cognition from Breslau over at Emory University. It says, grounded cognition rejects traditional views that cognition is computation on amodal symbols in a modular system, independent of the brain's modal systems for perception, action, introspection. Instead, grounded cognition proposes that modal simulations, bodily states, situated action underlie all cognition. Accumulating behavioral neural evidence supporting this view comes from, and he's just saying there's a lot of evidence for this, it comes from research on perception, memory, knowledge, language, thoughts, social cognition, and development. So we have a lot of back evidence that says, yeah, your knowledge base is not abstract symbology, it's more grounded in your experiential aspects. Another definition on this grounded cognition from Lawrence et al. Grounded theories assume that there is no central module for cognition, for knowledge. There's no central knowledge part of your brain. According to this view, all cognitive phenomena, including those considered the province of amodal cognition, such as reasoning or numeric and language processing, are ultimately grounded in and emerge from a variety of bodily, affective, perceptual, and motor processes. And then he argues that there's a lot of evidence for this again. So maybe stories can tap into this experiential aspect. When I'm telling you a story of my childhood, maybe you could hear that whoosh of the fireball, you could hear the cicadas, you could feel the heat of the summer or the heat of the fireball. You've had experiences with fire. You know what fire is. When I start talking about a fireball, you are tapping into your own experiences to feed that into, listening to my story and giving it meaning to yourself. So if we could take our science and turn it into a story form that kind of taps into this grounded cognition, we should have better attention in our audience and be able to communicate our information better once we have their attention. So we say that these experiential aspects, they have corollaries in the neural mechanisms of our brain. I mean, your memories are encoded into your brain, so there are actually neurons programmed to fire when I talk about various, auditory, tactition, olfaction, all these bodily states. You're going to have some part of your brain that automatically says, yeah, I know what that means. I've been there. I've done that. And you're going to relate to it better. So when I tell you of an experience, technically you're experiencing it too. And this kind of gets into that mirror neuron idea, if you've heard of that, but it goes beyond that. You're actually experiencing, pulling up your own past experiences to live this story that I'm telling you. Now, on the side of this, there's another field of psychology called neurocinematics, where you take subjects and you put them in an fMRI, a functional magnetic resonant imaging machine, which images the activity of the brain, and you show them clips of various movies, like Alfred Hitchcock, Bang, You're Dead. Very intense story. It's got perfect story structure to it. Or Sergio Leone's The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. You know, if you've ever seen that one, it's a good story, but it's a little wandering at points. Larry David's Curb Your Enthusiasm, which has no story structure to it whatsoever. If you've ever seen the show, it's basically a guy going through his daily life and funny things happen, right? Or you show them shots of Washington Park. Just people in Washington Park. There is no story structure to that one whatsoever. Now, what you're looking for here is you look at different subjects watching these and you see how much their brains are firing in a similar manner, what we call the intersubject correlation. Intersubject correlation here says these people are thinking the same, they're going through the same experiences in their head if it's highly correlated. And boy, does this, it's not a slight effect, it's a big effect. When you put story structure into whatever you're doing here, you will have the subjects in your audience all thinking the same. Their brains are firing the same. Their attention is wrapped on what you're doing here, right? You go to Washington Park and your mind is wandering all over the place, and you're not thinking the same as other people. Now, I want to say that a lot of what I'm going to tell you today is actually coming from this book, Connection, Hollywood Storytelling and Critical Thinking, by Randy Olson, Dorrie Barton, and Brian Palermo. Very good book, and I really am borrowing heavily from it. I will also be taking from Joseph Campbell's Hero of a Thousand Faces, which is kind of the archetypal story book, and we'll get into maybe mathematics of humor too here. So Randy Olson, he's got an interesting story himself. He's a PhD marine biologist who was on the tenure track at Harvard and dropped it all. He got in a car, went off west to Hollywood, and decided he was going to learn how to make movies. Because he felt like there was an issue with a general American public not getting his science, and he wanted the general public to get his science. So I don't know how many of you have seen the movie A Flock of Dodos, but that is his production, right? That was his first movie, and he's done a couple things since then. He's also been putting these seminars together, writing this book with these others about, there's another one before this that he wrote called Don't Be Such a Scientist. Don't be such a cardboard stiff figure, go be a person when you're talking to the public. Well, together with his colleagues here, I'll just call them the Connection team, okay? The Connection team basically says you gotta have two basic coordinates to your storytelling. One is the narrative structure, right? Having a good story structure. And the other is, there's a reason this goes downward arrow, it's the humanizing aspect, being less of the scientist and more of the human. So we'll start off with the narrative structure first, and then I'll get into the humanizing aspect after that. How many lectures in this room have been given in a form of, we found this, and then we found this, and then we found this, so we went back and looked for that, and we got this information, and then we concluded this, the end. And that will work fine. That's exposition. This and this and this and this is what we call exposition. It works fine if you were talking to people in your field and we all are interested in the subject already and want to hear about it, but I'll tell you something, when it comes to the general public, nobody cares about your esoteric little field. You think it's the coolest thing in the world because that's what you study. Nobody cares about it. I used to think this was my teaching philosophy. If you read my old philosophy statement, it says something like, I teach through my fascination. What fascinates me, Wrong. I've changed my mind very much. It's how it's presented, right? So this and does not do it. So you take a look at Alfred Hitchcock, who's the master of storytelling. How is he going to come about this? I'll give you the opening of Rope here, where you have a city scene and there are people. It's either early morning or late afternoon. It's an urban setting. There's a building with a balcony, right? You're up on a balcony there, and The balcony has a window, and the window's curtains are all drawn, and back behind those curtains you're not sure what's happening, but, right, and then all of a sudden something's happening. I mean, who's this guy? Why is he being choked? Who are the guys who are choking him? How do they get together? I mean, how do they know each other? What are they going to do with the body? What's going to happen next? All of a sudden, there are a ton of questions in your head because you stop doing and you go, but. That, I cannot stress how key that word is, right? But, the reason why you bring this in is because but is conflict. And it's been said there is no story without conflict. Or another way to say it, conflict is the story. If you don't have conflict, nobody's going to care about listening to your story. There's another reason I put Cartman up there besides the danger of homonyms. It's the South Park is obviously done rather well. Whether you like it or not, whether you watch it or not, it's done well. Clearly these guys know how to tell a story. And there was a great special that was done on the making of South Park. Each week they would make a new episode, so like 7 days they did this making of South Park in 7 episodes. So each day they had a different episode. Day 3, they walk into Trey Parker's office and he's sitting there with the draft and he's writing furiously, and they ask him, "What are you doing?" And he's saying, "Well, I've written my first draft, and every time I write a first draft, I then sit down and go through the draft, and everywhere I see the word and, I cut it out, if I can. And I replace it with but or therefore." That's a stupid, simple rule, but I cannot express how, I mean, it works for these guys. It really works for these guys. If you can take out and, put in but or therefore, in fact, start to structure sentences in an and, but, therefore manner, you're going to be a lot more effective communicator. So what you're doing here is you're setting out the thesis, the and, but there's this antithesis. And so the whole point of the story is to come towards the synthesis of these two, the too hot thesis, too cold antithesis, just right in the middle, Goldilocks idea, right? It's a little simplistic, but to get from thesis, antithesis to the synthesis, we go through what is known as the story arc, right? You start off with exposition. This happens, and then this happens, and then this happens. But there's no story until, but something happens, right? The moment but comes in, then there's questions. Well, what's going on here? What's the battle between these two opposites here that's going on? And so you're going to take the whole audience on a journey from the questions to the answers, in which you finally say, therefore, we fall into the synthesis. Right? We get to the end and it just kind of falls into place. It unties itself. And that's the synthesis. In the middle there, from questions to answers, you're doing the whole arcing story. You go out of exposition into the rising action, the climax, and then the falling action. Denouement is a term that literally means untying. You've tied these two opposites together, they're fighting, and you've untied them at the end, right? So that's the general story arc that you want to get into. Now that's easy for me to say, but another aside note is you learn the rules to break them. You want to be good, so it might be a little difficult just looking at that, saying, how do I put my science story, whatever science story you have, into that kind of a format. And by the way, these points are fluid. I mean, you saw Alfred Hitchcock started his butt a minute into the movie. Other movies, they can go on exposition for minutes before they start the story, right? So you can move the relative positions of these around some. Now, what the connections team has given scientists to kind of boil this down and simplify it is what they call the WSP model. You say, your story that you want to tell the world, start off with the one word that most encapsulates that story and make it a human word. I just recently got invited to give a talk on climate change to Green Mountain high schoolers, 9th grade freshmen. And I started doing this. I said, what's the one word I want to get across? Climate? No, they don't care. Data? Hell no. Statistically, no. Yeah. I finally settled on the word future, because when you're talking to a bunch of 9th graders about climate change, what's most important to them? Their future. Yeah? So I said, okay, future is my theme for this talk. and then you stick it into a sentence structure, and, but, therefore. You know, science is the best method we have for understanding the natural world, and it has told us that climate is changing and that we may be causing that change. But science cannot deal directly with the future. Never has been able to. It only deals directly with the past. It can only deal with the future by the things that it's learned from its past. Therefore, I'm going to tell you a story about the climate's past that allows you to understand what your future might be. So then, once you've started it in that manner, it's a nice, easy little way to progress into maybe the last part, the paragraph form. This is what you'd call the elevator pitch, right? You're trying to get a grant, and you're on the elevator with Donald Trump or something. You hit the 13th floor, you're on your way up, and you say, "Hey, I got this idea. Do you mind funding it?" And he says, "You got until the 13th floor. Give me your quick 2-minute pitch." This is where the log line comes in, and this is where Hollywood really comes in, because every Hollywood writer has to put out a log line, that quick elevator pitch to the producer that says, "Here's my story in a real quick summary." So what I've got on a handout up here, if you want to grab them afterwards or if you have them in front of you now, is the general log line idea, which says that every story has this format, that you start with, in an ordinary world, a flawed protagonist, a hero, has their life upended when some dramatic catalytic event occurs to them. Kind of upends their life, right? After taking some stock on this whole manner, the hero commits to action. Now, they commit to action and they think they're doing fine, but then the stakes get raised. And there's that "but" word right in there. But when the stakes get raised, the hero must learn the lesson to stop the antagonist and achieve their goal. Right? That's really every story that's ever told in Hollywood, if you really pay attention. Or to put it in a more prosaic form, I mean, you could practically hear the voiceover on this. "In an ordinary world, a flawed protagonist gets their life upended when a catalytic event happens. After taking stock, the hero commits to action. But when the stakes get raised, will the hero be able to learn the lesson to get their goal?" I mean, that's every story right there. Now, you don't believe me, we can play with a few movies here. A talented but arrogant out-of-work actor. In an ordinary world where men play male characters and females play female characters, this talented but arrogant out-of-work actor, desperate for acknowledgement, auditions for a soap opera disguised as a woman, gets the part, finding instant popularity, but when he falls in love with his female co-star and receives a marriage proposal from her father, he has to learn to be as good of a man as he is a woman so he can earn love, respect, and work as himself. Right, that's Tootsie. And it's all there. In an ordinary world where people play, their normal sex gender, this flawed protagonist has their life upended. When they get the part, they take stock and say, "Yes, I'm going to take this part and do the best I can," but when the stakes get raised, he falls in love, and the woman's father falls in love with him. He has to learn the lesson to overcome the adversary, in this case is himself, right? Sometimes the enemy is yourself, right? A spoiled young woman's husband dies on their wedding night. She joins the army to forget herself, and after an embattled beginning, she thrives. But when she falls in love again with an unfaithful man who tries to control her, she has to remember what strong stuff she's really made of before she loses herself her chance to truly live, and that's Private Benjamin. Again, you can do the 1, 2, 3, 4 bullet points. Write down that thing. Police chief, afraid of the water, is just transferred to an island of narrow-minded xenophobes when a teenager girl's body is found ravaged by predatory shark. The chief tries to close the beaches, angering the town which wants to preserve summer tourism. But when the shark eats a young boy, the chief, along with a pretentious young scientist and abrasive old mariner, go to sea to hunt down and kill the rogue shark before it can murder anyone else. Of course, we're dealing with Jaws here. Now, I did mention another movie at the beginning of this talk here, right? And this one should become pretty obvious pretty fast. In an ordinary world, a flawed protagonist gets their life upended when a catalytic event occurs, right? After taking stock, in a rough way, the hero that we're concerned with takes action, right? He takes action, and it's kind of this high point of the story. You've hit that peak. But when the stakes get raised, this hero must learn the lesson in order to overcome the enemy and achieve their goals. Okay, in this particular case, yes, we're dealing with Star Wars 1977. And then we had The Empire Strikes Back, the best one, and The Jedi, and then that had those horrible prequels that completely raped my childhood. Oh, God. But going back to the original, George Lucas did quite point blank say, I am using the logline maker formula, and I got it from Joseph Campbell. All right? This is not like Hollywood came up with this. This is Joseph Campbell, a mythologist, who's looking back at world mythologies from long times back and saying, every hero just is the same hero, putting these different masks on. They all go through this hero journey, basically. And the logline maker is the formula of the hero journey. So Hollywood's not just, making this up off the top of their head. So borrowing from these various sources, we'll go through those points. In an ordinary world, clearly Luke Skywalker does not live in an... Has anybody here not seen Star Wars? Go see it, would you? All right. It's not ordinary to you and me, it's ordinary to him. It's boring, it's stagnant, it's a place of it's dying. If it doesn't change or grow, the hero or that world will stagnate and die. And so it's going to mostly contrast with the world it will become. So you've got your science story. What's the world that's ordinary you start with? It's usually a world without the knowledge you're going to bring in some way. But the more you can contrast that ordinary world with what will become by the end of the story, the more different those two are, the more powerful your story is, right? I mean, if they're sitting right next to each other, who cares? So you didn't go very far. So in the beginning, not much is known about X. We don't know about the Force in Star Wars. Okay, we don't know about whatever it is you're studying, maybe, in your story. Depends on how you want to tell it. The flawed protagonist, the hero, you might automatically think that's you in your story. It is not necessarily. The hero is going to be whoever is in the story who wants the most, gets the most when you win. When they win, we win. They really are the one who's motivated for this. So is it really you? Or maybe it isn't you. Maybe it's someone else, or maybe it's something else. Because that can be completely valid too. You say, well, why a flawed protagonist? I mean, can't they just be a nice guy? No, the flaw is absolutely essential. That's part of the story, is overcoming these flaws, these setbacks, and getting to this higher level. So you've got to take that flaw and you've got to fix it, master it, release it. Some of the most useful flaws, I mean, obviously you don't want like child rapist, that doesn't work. You want something like, resistance to change, fear of getting attached, being overly cerebral. Scientists, that's considered a flaw. The need to control, apathy, hubris. I mean, these are things that we can all kind of go, yeah, we all have those, and so I can forgive another who has the same. All right, or maybe they need to convince, collaborate, cooperate, compromise. If any of you have seen the movie Guardians of the Galaxy lately, I mean, that's exactly what that's all about. It's very individual heroes that have to learn to work together even though they're very independent. But here's a good thing about, I bring this movie up because it's a group of heroes, right? But if you're going to use a group of heroes, you can do that, but you should still focus on one, right? Quinn was the main character in that movie. And by the way, after you do this, every Hollywood movie is ruined for you from now on, sorry. If you saw Band of Brothers on HBO, it's about the 101st Airborne. The hero of that series is the 101st Airborne. But they focus on Captain Winters through the whole thing. They do go another step. They have several main characters that they follow. So there are like several heroes. They keep one main hero, but they have several heroes. Now that's a much more challenging effort if you're going to try that one, because you have to have a complete story arc for every single one of your protagonists all the way through. So that's a little bit more difficult, takes a little more talent. Your best heroes, smart, funny, good at what they do, working class, independent, resilient, adaptable. That's the kind of things that we tend to latch on to and therefore identify with. So number 3, the catalytic event that happens. This is what we call the call to adventure. It's when the story finally starts happening. It's kind of exposition up to this, right? Here's this guy, he's bored on an ordinary world, and now something happens. And it's usually when we first see the enemy at the gate, right? He may not be in direct confrontation yet, but the enemy is at the gate for sure. We see the conflict rising. Now, this can be a positive event. I know it's written as, boy, it must be some bad thing, the enemy at the gate, but I mean, getting into graduate school might be your catalytic event. You know, I mean, for me, there's a huge story that happens after that one, right? So it depends. Think about, you know, these things. Winning the lottery could be a positive event that is catalytic and starts the story off. So with the enemy at the gate, we have our goal in sight. We see where we're going. We can take that journey from the questions to the answers, the synthesis at this point. So after taking stock, we're weighing our options, but the options are closing fast. A common thing here is that the hero is deciding for themselves. Obviously, you can't be forced slave labor to achieve the goal and consider that a hero act. You have to choose to take on this goal. You might need a little help, right? Get a little assistance. There's a very frequent theme that there's somebody at the gate who's going to help you and give you the keys and help you on through. It's also very frequent that the hero at first says no. This does make a little bit more powerful of a story. If you just write in and say, yep, I'm going for it, I mean, there's something a little bit more noble about saying, no, this is beyond me, this is too much, but then saying yes, and I'm going to do it anyway, you know? So that's a nice little twist if you can put it in somehow. In a science story, right? I mean, this is Hollywood, and it's easy when I'm talking about Star Wars. You're talking about your science story here. Maybe you were trying other research avenues, and you were saying, no, that one that eventually succeeded, maybe that you thought that was too obvious or it was too complicated or something, and you put it aside, and then finally you said yes to it, and you went for it, and it worked out, or something like that. So hero taking action in number 5, this is crossing the threshold, right? We're getting into the special world. We left that ordinary world behind here. So out of Joseph Campbell's book, he talks about this fateful region of both treasure and danger, maybe variously represented as a distant land, a forest, a kingdom underground, or beneath the waves, or above the sky. A secret island, lofty mountaintop, or profound dream state, but it is always a place of strangely fluid and polymorphous beings, unimaginable torments, superhuman deeds, and impossible delight. The hero can go forth of his own volition to accomplish the adventure, or he may be carried or sent abroad by some benign or malignant agent. The adventure may begin as a mere blunder, or still again, one may only casually be strolling when some passing phenomenon catches the wandering eye and lures one away from the frequented paths of man. Examples might be multiplied ad infinitum from every corner of the world. Right? We're crossing the threshold into the special world. We have new rules. The old rules don't apply anymore, right? We're in the cantina at Star Wars. We're in the tavern of Moby Dick. We're in that inn by the edge of the woods in The Hobbit, right? You know, you're about to step off. So in superhero movies, you know, the moment when the superhero says, yes, I am Batman, yes, I am Spider-Man, Superman, that is the stage 5. That's the hero taking action and saying, yes, I am going to do this. The more obvious and intense the goal at this point, obviously the audience is going to yearn for them to take action more. They can see that goal more clearly. Here the hero takes us to an emotional high at the story's midpoint. We're learning new skills, we're making new friends, things are happening, and it's that peak, the climax. However, when I read this story, I kind of think of that line from the Quran that says, do you think you're going to get to the kingdom of heaven without the trials and tribulations of those who went before you? You need to sacrifice, you need to suffer, and so the stakes are going to get raised. So stakes get raised, but when the antagonist starts to win, your enemy is starting to win. Conflict was in stage 3. It comes in again even more powerfully here in stage 6. So the conflict, which brings out the worst. Anybody who's been married knows this. When you're in a very stressful, bad situation, you're going to bring out the worst in both people at the same time, and yet it requires the best out of both of you, right? And if you can actually get the best out of both of you, wow, what an achievement. And so this is what we're going for in the hero here. It's going to be a situation that would probably bring out the worst in person, but they need to like reach inside and bring out the best and move forward. There's often loss of some kind, and in a lot of these stories it's a loss of a loved one in some way, a severe sacrifice, right? And so you've got to kind of regroup and relearn what strategies you're going to take. Basically, the enemy has pinpointed you down. They know your weakness, and they've nailed it. They're exploiting it at that point. So there's a lot of these themes of being left all alone, left at the altar, stranded out there, trying to regroup at this point. Now the conflict between the antagonist and the hero, it's not automatically a person against a person type thing. It can be human versus human, human versus nature, human versus the supernatural, human versus machine or technology, human versus themselves, right? I mean, you think about Star Wars, it hits practically every one of those in some way. So you think about the movie 2012, who's the antagonist? It's the planet. Who's the antagonist? You think about the Terminator, who's the antagonist? It's Arnold, right? That's your antagonist. He's a machine in that case. Technology is your enemy. So continuing with number 6, the stakes getting raised here, we are increasing our conflict. Conflict manifests through some kind of power, and it's that antagonist that's wielding that power in that case. So you are going to be having your hero fight against this kind of power. So as with the hero, this antagonist could be a group, but you might want to focus on one individual. Same thing I said for heroes goes for the antagonists here as well. So the more conflict, the better, because it emphasizes, what the fight's about. It emphasizes the forces pitched against the hero. And there are 2 main types of conflict. Type 1 conflict, known as offset conflict, goes like this. You've got hero wants X, antagonist wants Z, but you can't have both X and Z. So we're going to have to reach a synthesis where the hero usually wins, unless it's a tragedy. Number 2, conflict, direct conflict, and that's a lot more effective. If your story, as you go through in your head, is a type 1 offset conflict, see if you can manipulate it into a direct type 2 conflict, because it's a lot more effective for audiences when you go that direction. A type 2 direct conflict says antagonist and hero both want X, and you can't both have X, right? So that's the difference between type 1 and type 2 conflict. So now we move into number 7, the hero must learn the lesson, right? This is the part of the story of death and rebirth. It's a big part of the theme here. And you have to have death of some kind, die to the old self, right? You have all these flaws in the hero. The hero needs to die to that stuff, kill that stuff off, and be reborn in a new light as you were. So death often means withdrawal in some kind from the world or friends. A new plan and a recommitment to action comes out of this by the end of stage 7. And so the hero is learning to overcome the flaw. They have to understand the theme of the story. They finally get it, as it were. In Star Wars, it's basically from the trash compactor to the attack on the Death Star is stage 7, right? The trash compactor is Jonah in the belly of the whale, if you want to look at it that way, right? Or, here's another one. If you didn't catch this one, did you see Gravity? If you didn't catch the rebirth scene in Gravity, boy, is it obvious. She literally almost dies. She passes out from lack of oxygen. Then she comes out of her shell and goes into a uterine state, for God's sake. So yeah, there is an obvious rebirth to the flawed hero in that movie, right? So number 8, you stop the antagonist, right? You're going to achieve your goal finally. Sheriff Brody kills the shark. Dorothy kills the witch. Luke blows off the Death Star. So you finally remove that last obstacle so that the hero can achieve their goal. If you can, try to make it happy, light-hearted. This is a fun, light part of the story. There are stories known as tragedies, and okay, that's the exception. You just take it down from there. The hero can achieve their goal. Okay, you blow up the Death Star. That's not the goal. It's not really the goal. There might be some external goal out there that's achieved, you blow up the Death Star, but it's really the internal action of the hero coming to be the best hero that they can be. That is the goal that you're trying to get to. So the hero is achieving more of a feeling than an external change in reality. So you're looking for love, security, peace, freedom, confidence, triumph, hope, awe. Those are the things that are the ultimate, goals, the rewards for this hero journey. So there's the WSP model. Try to find the word that's most human and core to your story, put it into an and, but, therefore sentence, and then expand that out into a log line, and you basically got the structure of your story. Again, not a Hollywood ephemeral fly-by-night little idea here. This is tapping back into mythology, which takes you back at least a few 10,000 years. So we think, yeah, this is something that just resonates with humans in a certain way. In some ways, I've probably been telling you this stuff, and while I tell you, you're almost going, yeah, I kind of already knew this. You know, I may not have put it together myself this way, but it's kind of like you already knew it. That saying at the beginning was one of Joseph Campbell's favorites, a Polynesian saying, we're all standing on a whale fishing for minnows. He used it more in the term of we have all these daily problems and issues around us, the minnows, and here we are standing on the ground of all being, you know, the mysterium tremendum. I'll use it more in the sense of our ego, our conscious mind up here really thinks it's running the show, and it kind of says I'm the whole thing, and it's out there fishing for minnows while standing on this thing that's called the subconscious and the unconscious. It's a whale, and it's being used all the time. My unconscious is being used right now, yours is as well, and if I can tap into it, wow, I could probably be a more effective communicator. So the narrative structure is one part of this equation. The other part is this humanizing aspect. And we said that being too cerebral is actually a flaw, right? You don't want to be too stuck in the head. So we're asking you to come out of the head, down into the heart, the emotional side, down into the gut, the humor side, and if you've got it, maybe down into the sex appeal side. That is part of this whole humanizing aspect, and you see why the arrow is going downward here. But it really does get more and more effective downward as a communicator. Now, evidence for this comes from Amity and Rosenthal in 1993, in which they took 3 10-second videos of an instructor, and they used a total of 13 instructors, teachers, from actual class sessions. So you have 39 10-second clips that they then randomize and show to 9 female college students and ask them to rank these teachers on the following qualities. Now, the ones that you see that are in red there, confidence, activity, competence, dominance, those have a very high global correlation between the judges. So, apparently even with a 10-second video, one judge can say this is a confident instructor and another one can say that's not a confident instructor. 10 seconds. Now, you want to really amp this up. Those high correlations also correlate high with evaluations of students in the class by the end of the semester. In other words, I can watch 10 seconds of an instructor and tell you what their evaluation will be at the end of the semester on those red qualities there. And what even gets worse is they took these clips and cut them down to 5 seconds. Effect still holds. 4 seconds. Effect still holds. 3 seconds. 2 to 3 second clips, and you can tell if a teacher has got these qualities. Okay? Now, why is that? Well, it's not what they're saying, obviously. It's not the content. I mean, I always say you need to know your stuff, first off. There's no getting around that. But then, it's the style in which you present this stuff. So there's this study in '67, Moravian, which is called the Rule of Communication, the 73855 Rule of Communication, that says communication is 7% what you say, 38% the tone of your voice, and 55% your body language or your facial expressions. All right? Now this is probably one of the most misused studies ever, especially with self-help, these motivational speakers. They basically give this as the end-all of communication, and that's ridiculous. I mean, if that was true, then a really good body talker could talk in French to me and I could understand. No. This is about communicating feelings and attitudes, but it's really effective. You say, hey, Paul, I really like your shoes, and I really like your pants and your shirt, but no, I'm not going to go the butt route. Or I could just change that completely and say, I really like your pants and I really like your shoes. Or I can go, I really like your pants and your shoes. And those are 3 very different attitudes right there being communicated, but I said the exact same thing. It's not what is being said, it's how it's being said, right? And that feeds back. The body part, I mean, you're seeing me act out, and I didn't quite understand where I got that part. I got it from my sister, who's an actress, and we used to practice back and forth. So, you know, this is all performance up here with the body and the voice and everything and the face. I'll give you a little secret. It's a little embarrassing to admit this, but before I came into this room and before I start every year class period, before I walk in, I get a little nervous. And so I go off in private and I do this. It's weird. But do it yourself, see what it feels like. Because your body states feed back to the mind. Your mind feeds in the body states. If you have a positive attitude, then it'll come across to your students. If you are closed up and a negative, that comes across too. But also your body states. I've been told on evaluation that sometimes when I get asked a question, I do this, and I've been told this makes me seem uncertain and maybe holding back. So I've been very attentive not to do this. So, your body stature can really have an effect. The words you pick, again, they should be positive too. They should be active just like your body is active. Your words should be active. Don't use passive voice, use active voice. Pick the words that have a positive feeling to them, not a negative feeling. Avoid the jargon. I love the one line, I think it was Brian Palermo in here, said, look, to most people, axes are a pair of hatchets and standard deviation is an alcohol-induced minor sexual kink. Don't expect them to understand your jargon. Find a way to use different words. I mean, that's a big part of the podcast I did, was throwing out the good jargon and finding different ways to say everything that anybody could understand. I'll throw the jargon in if I define it first properly. And then the absolutely most important first thing you can do is claim any and all superlatives. If you have the biggest study of something, the smallest, the fastest, the slowest, take it and make sure you say it. I did a dig up in Snowmass and I found the second sloth head up there and it was all broken and destroyed, but it was a little higher than the first one. So I get to say I found the highest altitude Jeffersonian sloth in the world. I will claim that. Anything I can claim as a superlative in my story, claim it. And then the humor part, how do you communicate humor? It's in timing to a degree, and I say take an improv class. I had never taken an improv class, but like I said, I used to practice lines with my sister who was at Stella Adler Acting School at NYU, and so she'd be teaching me all sorts of stuff about improv. And the main thing with improv is just learning to say yes and never saying no to the other person, just being always on your toes and ready to respond. And if you're not comfortable, take an improv class, try it out, see if it helps you out. And it might help you with humor. And if you're kind of just clueless on humor, I know that there's plenty of people out there just clueless. There's this book, The Mathematics of Humor, that actually goes through how humor works in a mathematical format. It mainly comes out of catastrophe theory. You're taking a wandering path up logically, and all of a sudden you whoop, jump off. And that's what makes people go, whoa, and laugh, right? Einstein and Newton and Pascal are playing hide and seek. Einstein's, okay, I'm going to do the seeking first. So Pascal runs off and hides while Einstein's counting, and Newton just walks off a little way and he draws a square around himself. And then Einstein stops counting and looks over and says, Newton, I found you. And he said, no, you didn't. I'm standing in a square meter. You found Pascal. Now, I wouldn't tell that joke to a normal audience, right? You guys, okay, a Newton per square meter is a Pascal. But, so I took you up this little path and then we jumped off catastrophe theory. So humor does have a certain structure, but the bottom line is, be Steve Irwin, don't be Ben Stein. You want to be out there and go, yeah, like that. You don't want to be all right. That is not going to go anywhere. So that's the humanizing aspect. So you put the story structure in, give it that narrative structure, people resonate with it already, then put the human side in, and I bet you're going to do a lot better. So that is my talk on how to present science through story to the public. So thanks.